And then let me just make sure.
And yeah.
Okay. We are now live on Twitch. Dope. We are live on
All right,
YouTube.
and warning, my allergies are horrendous. So if you ever hear a random sneeze, I'm not trying to interrupt you. So that, that'd be just
um.
brutal.
Okay. So whenever you're ready, I will absolutely hit record this time for sure.
All right, let me just get everything. All right, I'm good to go whenever. So yeah, just hit that record and we can have some fun.
All right. Recording in 3, 2, 1.
Hey, what up? Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Tonic Accord podcast. I am Alex Kapitko, and I'm joined with my friend and co-host Drew Nepley. We both met at Chapman University. Oh man, going on, geez, 7 years ago, I think, if I'm not incorrect. And
Yeah. Wow.
since then, we always joked about making, yeah, right. Like it's kind of wild. Like time flies, and it's kind of cool to see that we're still having fun talking about politics this far removed from our freshman dorm. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
But today we are going to get into we're going to start off at least with a kind of interesting topic here. It's about Peru. And just a little quick background for those who don't know. Peru has had a pretty chaotic time with presidents and leaders over the last couple decades. They until the last year, they were actually kind of a success story in Latin America. The Economist said that from 2001 to 2016, the poverty rate, went from 60% to 21%, and there was average growth in the economy of 5.6% per year, which is kind of good because a lot of other Latin American countries in the region have really struggled economically speaking. But then, unfortunately, the country is super divided. They've had what, four presidents, eight finance ministers in the last 5 years just alone. There's a New York Times article that was kind of funny but also like scary that said that does Peru need a special prison just for ex-presidents? They've had a lot of issues with corruption, authoritarianism, left authoritarianism, right fascism. They've kind of seen it all. But things were going well, but then COVID seemed to hit Peru and it killed over 190,000 people and 3 million fell back into poverty. So Peru was doing great, and then this all happened. So then I believe it was back in November, there was a very decisive problem that happened. There's this guy named Vizcarra, who was the president, President Martin Vizcarra, and he was removed over corruption charges. And then basically they had an interim president and then another interim president until this election. And that's what Drew and I are going to be talking about today. And so a guy named Pedro Castillo looks to have won against Kiko Fujimori, who is the daughter of another Fujimori, Alberto Fujimori, who was a conservative autocrat who got rid of the Shining Path. But that's for another episode. But, anyways, it looks like as of now Castillo won. He's definitely kind of a left wing populist, but he won with what looks like 50.2% of the vote. And so it just shows how divided the country is. And there's a lot of questions on will he even be able to do anything? So Drew, sorry, long-winded rant there aside, but what do you think about all this? Like, just as a first take here.
No, I mean it's good to have that context. We have to, I had to get all this context myself, and when we doing research for this. But yes, I mean Peru is in this weird moment where there's a lot of similarities to the United States. I feel, and there are also some differences. But yeah, I mean you have a narrow election. Um, you have a rural and urban divide. You have a populist movement, and then you also now have claims of election fraud, as this election has now come to what many believe is a close. Kiko Fujimori is now claiming that there is fraud. Um, so right off the bat, I notice a trend, and we'll talk a bit about Netanyahu probably later, is that like these autocratic style, generally more right wing, not always, but generally more right wing, autocrats just claim fraud when they lose in elections. Donald Trump being one of them. Now Kiko Fujimori, Netanyahu, the Belarus president, right? Same thing, where it's becoming the
True.
playbook. It's you don't lose. No one lose gracefully anymore. You just, if you lose, you claim election fraud and you fight tooth and nail in whatever facet you have. The problem is, um, while I watched a debate from France 24 that included, professors and professionals in Peru and Peruvians that understood the system. So from what I gathered from them is they don't believe that there will be any serious like challenge, like any serious court challenge from Kiko Fujimori. They believe that um, the system will like show that Castillo won. However, they fear that because there's such a cultural divide and that the election was so close that the rhetoric used by Kiko Fujimori could lead to violence in the streets. Castillo only won by a very, very slim margin, and half the country feels that he is a communist threat, even though he has said recently that there will be no communism in Peru and he will be the head of state and not some communist from abroad or whatever. There are worries that his left leaning his socialist left leaning revolution style mimics that of Venezuela more so than Evo Morales, and that's debatable, but that's the fear. So all that to say is, I see this election fraud BS come up again, and then now I don't know if there's election fraud, but from what I understand, there's not, and it can that rhetoric is going around country to country that can really be dangerous and cause people to be violent.
Very good point. Very good point. And I think kind of the success of these, like you said, it is mainly right-leaning autocrats. Lukashenko might be the exception right now, but it is true that I guess there's always going to be fraud, right? Like when you and I've talked about this time and time again, there's always going to be minuscule amounts of fraud in any election. That's just kind of what happens.
Yeah.
But basically, this burden of proof is not needed by these leaders. Instead, what they're doing is saying, well, if we find any crumb of fraud or any little, whisper about fraud, it just muddles the waters. And so basically, I mean, to me, again, it's another one of these leanings towards an autocratic fascism, is that if you say the election's fraudulent, your voters believe it, they don't have faith in the next one, and they're willing to do anti-democratic things to do so. Now, I'm not going to rant about that anymore because that could take us down a whole other conversation, but you're right. It is interesting to see that she's doing this. So far, it doesn't worry me like other places, especially in the United States right now with these Arizona audits and stuff. But what does worry me about Fujimori is that, if Castillo won 50.2% of the vote, that means probably at least 45% or how much more voted for Fujimori or support her. So when he has a weak mandate, if he, ends up winning this, like it looks like he will, it's a bitterly divided country, and you don't need them sowing this doubt. Especially then when it looks like he's applauded Evo Morales, the embattled ex-leader of Bolivia, Maduro in Venezuela, and he even likes communist Cuba. So the thing is that I think he's kind of a not ideal candidate to kind of fire up the other side. And so with maybe this mix of division and fraud reports, who knows? I do know that in November when the last guy, I'm totally spacing on his name, Biscata was removed, there was violence and chaos on the streets, but I think that was mainly with COVID lockdowns.
Yeah.
But it's gonna be really interesting to see. The one thing that I do think is interesting is that this Biscata guy, which I just wanted to mention really quick, he was removed or ousted, I guess, by Congress because of corruption charges. And the interesting thing is that they accused him of gross negligence in handling the crisis of the COVID crisis, and it was basically using the permanent moral incapacity grounds, which are kind of found in some article of Peru's constitution. But the problem is it was all the opposition to him, and basically this permanent moral incapacity is kind of like, what is it, the 27th Amendment, I want to say, in the U.S., where it basically says you can remove the president for not being fit for office. And so it kind of shows that this Biscata guy was removed already for partisan means. So I think there's still a lot of anger in the country over, are these elections even real? Like, are we going to get anything done?
Yes.
And so I just wonder if this guy Castillo can do anything.
Well, yeah. So yeah. First of all, I also think it's worth noting that Kiko Fujimori I think, has a corruption charge as well, that she could be facing 30 years in prison. But one of the things is that that case will be delayed if she wins the election, which, again, it doesn't look like she will. Yeah, I think it's also worth noting that Castillo's not coming to this government with a majority at all. I think his party only has 37 out of 100 and something seats of Peruvian Congress. So by no means a majority. They're going to have some sort of alliances and coalitions. Um, he he has an interesting story though, and it shows that I think he kind of hit the moment. Like he's the kind of the guy for this moment in Peru. I'm not saying I particularly agree with all his politics, but if just looking at what Peruvians see as a movement of change, he has a really interesting story. He's from rural Peru that's very impoverished. He was a school teacher, or still is a school teacher until he becomes president elect, and he's even vowed to maintain his school teacher salary if he is elected. And one of the reasons what he said, one of the reasons he decided to run was because during the pandemic lockdowns, his school was so poor that they couldn't afford, and none of the kids had cell phones, no one had tablets, so they couldn't remotely do schoolwork like perhaps wealthier kids in the cities of Peru, and of course kids around the world that could afford that in wealthier countries. So he saw that discrepancy in his view, the discrepancy in equality, and he decided to run. So I think he really strikes a nerve and like touches a lot of people in rural Peru that feel that the urban areas don't represent them. In fact, some rural counties had over 80% vote for Castillo, whereas main cities like Lima were 2/3 for Kiko Fujimori. So there's obviously a rural urban divide in Peru where the rural areas are much more left leaning, much more socialist even, and want to literally change the constitution. That's something that Castillo has said himself. Whereas I think the reaction that I mentioned, that the fear of the other half of the people are they don't want to go down the path of Cuba and Venezuela. Now it's worth noting again that I think because of how narrow of a margin he won, and because of the issues of not having a majority in like the parliament, he's going to have to moderate his left-leaning stances, which he has started to do. One thing I picked up was that one of his main economic advisors, let me get it here. Where is he? Well, I mentioned one of his economic advisors used to work for the World Bank and is working on moderating his policies. When he was in the first round of elections, he talked about nationalizing a lot of Peruvian businesses. Now he's backed out a bit, maintaining that he's not going to completely nationalize all these resources, but work with businesses to be better for workers' rights. So he's moderated himself a bit. I think he realizes that he can't be a Hugo Chavez in this case.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely agree with you that just to start is that he's definitely not going to be a Chavez or a Maduro just because like you said he would need a mandate and it looks like
Yeah.
he has a pretty limited one at best right now. My issue though is like the Economist had a good point when I was reading their article. I think it was just this week on Peru, and they said that kind of Peru's strength, especially going into the 2000s, was that they kind of avoided these nationalist protectionist policies. And I'm glad to hear you say that he did, walk back on some of his nationalization of industries, because like the first thing I think of is, kind of this rural leftist who wants to nationalize everything and then economy goes down the shitter. Because Peru doesn't have oil, Peru doesn't have some of the things that, kept Venezuela afloat for these years before they hit hyperinflation. Um, but my thing is that like this article says, I'll just read this little part. As it said, the government in Peru used a healthy mix of free market economic policies and export-led growth, also with strong welfare nets and safety programs that helped the population grow while also opening it up to an export-driven economy. And that's just my worry, is that I think we're going to see this giant schism right now, this rural-urban divide, like you mentioned earlier, is that, Fujimori does resemble, and I think that's why she did decently well. Well, maybe there's more to that later, but I think she did really well in some ways because it does appeal to Fujimori, her father, Alberto, who was the first Japanese descendant ruler, or not ruler, but president of Peru. And he did cut back on the shining path that I think a lot of people, obviously, I'm not saying Castillo is a shining path guy, but a rural, more left leaning socialist group that wants nationalization and changes in economics, I think for a lot of Peruvians rings a bell of this time. And
Right.
I just don't think Peru wants to go back to that time. But again, I'm not defending or not defending either one of them. I just think that Peru was on the right track before COVID, and obviously inequality again and poverty issues are being shown with COVID, but I don't know if a rural farmer and school teacher is the best solution. That's just my personal opinion, you know.
Well, certainly Peru. I mean, enough of Peru thinks he is the way, right? He's won legitimately, but you're right.
That's
It's
true.
not by much, and he's going to have to, I think, like you said, moderate his, you know, left-leaning guerrilla tendencies. Not that I don't think he has any actual connection to like guerrilla groups, but the rhetoric is there. It's that slippery slope notion that people are afraid of. First it's this guy, and next it's the guy wearing the military cap with the red star. But I think he's trying to prove that that's not the case. We'll see if it's successful. As you said, Peru has had a lot of different heads of state very recently, so I'm hoping that they can get on some stable ground. And yeah, it's also interesting to see the claims of election fraud, which is becoming certainly a pattern among the sore losers of the democratic world.
If I could add one thing just super fast,
Sure.
I, I totally agree with all that. I think the problem too with this election, just something I noticed, was that there were 18 candidates in this election, and so of course you had a kind of pretty far right Fujimori versus a pretty far left Castillo, and it's unfortunate because there were 16 other candidates who, from what I've gathered, were less extreme than both of them. So it's just kind of interesting that two more radicals came out of this.
It shows how divided the country is, right?
Yep.
It's evidence to that. Um, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. Um, all right. I mean, should we bring it up to should we go to another person that just lost power, Netanyahu?
Let's do it.
Yeah, so Benjamin Netanyahu has been ousted. Israeli politics is something that I need to, brush up on a lot more. But it seems that like the coalitions of governments in their parliament could have to come to agreement on a prime minister, and for a while, Benjamin Netanyahu was able to keep enough coalition of parties to keep him in power, but just recently, and only by one vote in the parliament, he was just ousted, and he's actually going to be replaced by someone that used to work for him. Shoot, what is his name? Um,
Navalny Bennett.
yeah, yes. Um, so Naftali Bennett, right? Naftali Bennett is someone who I think used to be like one of his main campaign managers or secretary or media secretaries for Netanyahu back in the day, but now he's almost carved out his own political career. He was able to form a coalition that ranged from some mid right politicians to left leaning politicians, all the way to an Arab representative, which is not easy to do in Israeli politics. And so he was able to scrounge up enough political clout to basically form a new government and be entrusted with the prime minister position. Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to come back very soon. He also claims fraud, and it's certainly a massive change because Benjamin Netanyahu has been the head of prime minister of Israel for over a decade, and is certainly had a very nationalistic defensive policies. However, Naftali Bennett has also been pretty far right on some of Israel's defense policies. So it's interesting to see him come up with a coalition that I think will probably crumble pretty soon. What do you think, Alex?
It's not going to work. That's just my first take, and I'll explain why in a second. But I think that the world is, especially people that were not fans of Netanyahu, are excited. It's they had 4 elections in 2 years because just a coalition against Netanyahu could never be made. The coalition, which, like you mentioned, Bennett is actually further right than Netanyahu on a myriad of issues.
Yeah.
And Abbas is the leader of this Arab group who also is in the coalition. And then there's a guy named Lapid who is quite left on other issues. And so the only thing this group is unified in is hating Netanyahu. And yeah, that works to hate Netanyahu. But what happens when they start talking about the actual main issue that has been kind of the focus on Netanyahu for the last couple of years, which is settlements? And settlements is the first problem because Bennett actually was, I think he was a governor or a politician. No, it was a politician for one of these West Bank settlements. He actually lived in some of these taken settlements from Palestinians and Arabs. And so he's actually said let me see. He said Bennett and Lapid, who's the left one in this coalition, indicated that change won't extend to any policy shift on Israeli-Palestinian issues.
Right.
And yeah, Bennett, who's 49, will be the first prime minister in the past who has lived in a Jewish settlement in the occupied West Bank, and that is from Foreign Policy magazine. And so my issue is that there's something interesting about Netanyahu. Is that I don't like him. I think he's way too right wing kind of nationalist. But the thing is that under him, and I didn't know this till I read a great New York Times article yesterday, is that he actually has kept Israel out of conflict, and he's the only leader of Israel that has kept them out of what you would call a war. Now, obviously, there's been infadadas and other violent conflicts that have happened under his watch, but he actually is associated with a lot of Israelis as a defender of Israel. And so the problem is that he's actually kept somewhat stability while past leaders haven't. And people are worried that someone like Bennett, who actually has more nationalist views than even Netanyahu, might actually lead to a new conflict. And that is one thing that obviously is too early to tell, and that would divide this coalition. And basically, like you said, it was one vote that got this coalition into power. And if they divide on anything, then it could be over.
Yeah, I think that, like you said, he has that reputation of being the defender of Israel. That's like, his main thing. I mean, he gains popularity in the polls anytime Israel is attacked by Hamas. And I think that to expect, like, one is the first point, is to expect a massive change in policy regarding Palestine with Bennett is naive. I don't think that's going to happen. They've already said that's pretty much not going to happen, which does mean his coalition, especially the Arab representative, might be strained. However, like you also mentioned, that the coalition exists in as an antithesis, as an anti-Netanyahu thing. As Netanyahu has said, he's going to fight back super hard. He's going to be back soon. Perhaps an interesting analysis I heard from a reporter in Israel was that there is a possibility that because Netanyahu was going to be so probably very loud and boisterous and angry at this and be like, campaigning to come back as quick as possible, that his activity might glue the coalition together for a time, right? Like, let's say Netanyahu's gone and just retires, then the coalition probably will break down very soon because of the very obvious differences that are there to begin with. However, if Netanyahu is still very loud and boisterous and active in politics, which I very much guarantee he will be, there is a chance that the coalition might just keep that glue together, similar to the idea of, Trump continuing his political thing. It might be bad for Republicans because Democrats can stay unified against him, whereas without Trump, then all the cracks show between progressives and moderates, right? Same thing here. Perhaps maybe because of Netanyahu, the coalition stays together. But you're right. I think the big test is the next time we see violence in Gaza, the next time we see some real shit hit the fan again. Bennett is going to be tested to defend Israel. It'd be political suicide not to, and then boom, there his coalition is going to be really strained among the more left leaning sides. So I don't think it's going to be a radical change, but perhaps it might be a slow cooling of Israel's nationalism. Who we'll see.
Yeah, no, I mean, I really hope you're right, and I think the biggest takeaway that I've been kind of reading all over was that kind of the big straw that broke Netanyahu's back was that usually his rhetoric involving Palestine or other enemies like Iran, for example, involved like foreign issues, right? Like he never started an international conflict, for example, but he sent Mossad into Iran many times, and I think the difference, though, for a lot of Israelis was seeing Arab and Jewish Israelis beating each other up on the streets over the last month. And this was this kind of new chaos that I think was a lot different than previous times. And so I think you're right in a way, is that maybe this could hold the coalition together, because right now I read that Netanyahu's already having allies out on the streets, tormenting some of these coalition members. He wants the mob. He's definitely taken some playbooks out of Trump's, like, I don't think Trump reads, but I guess we could say playbook. But it does seem like Netanyahu could actually be helpful in keeping this coalition together. Now the one optimistic thing I will say is that I keep seeing this all over the place. The New York Times mentioned it, and so did the Atlantic. 80% of Israelis agree on the majority of issues. It's that small 20% that divides them. And so this coalition actually could do a lot of good things involving healthcare and education specifically. I didn't know this because I assumed Israel had good education. I don't know why, but it turns out that Israel has one of the worst education systems in the world for a developed nation. And
Wow.
so they could work on that. It's not the sexy stuff, but it's the stuff that they could do to like at least fix the tangibles. Kind of infrastructure-esque type of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean that is at the end of the day what most governing is not the sexy
Right.
stuff. So yeah, I mean hopefully they can get to work on that. But it's a coalition that's on very thin ice. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, definitely. Um, do you have any more thoughts about that before we move on?
No, I mean no. I'm just curious to see how it progresses. But yeah, I mean I thought it was a good segue because both sore losers are now claiming that they'll get back in power earlier than they should.
Oh, absolutely. No, I mean that definitely seems to be a trend, and like, like to me, it's very like antithetical to democracy because I keep trying to play this through my head, and it kind of goes with Trump, it goes with Viktor Orban, it goes with Netanyahu, it goes with Fujimori in Peru. It feels like if you put your head in one of the people that's been listening to their side, say the election stolen, then some of the violence and craziness makes more sense, right? Like I'm not
Mm,
trying to defend, say, like January 6th, but if you've been told for the last year that the election's stolen and they just want to take everything from you, then it kind of makes more sense when you take up arms. And I'm just worried that
right.
that's a trend that we're not seeing just in the Americas or Europe, but everywhere.
Yeah. Politicians are playing with fire when they're saying stuff like this, but they know it can work. They know it didn't work for Donald Trump, but it got close, and it could work, and has worked for other autocrats around the world to just stuff ballots or claim the other guy as a fraud and lock them up or whatever. And so yeah, it's a shame when you start to see democracies go down that way, but it's also encouraging when you see democracies narrowly avoid it, like the United States, like Peru. Even though I may not agree with politically with everything Castillo got elected for, it's good to see democracy prevail and hopefully a new direction. Right. Same thing with Israel. I certainly don't agree with everything Bennett represents, but I mean it's exciting to see a change. I think a lot of Israelis feel the same way. There was people celebrating in the streets when Netanyahu. Now, obviously not everybody, but some people were celebrating in the streets when Netanyahu was ousted, claiming that it's a long time coming because it's been over a decade and they want something new, even though it's maybe not the best.
New is good, change is good. I've always thought that for a long time. uh, so Joe Biden's had a pretty busy week. Did you happen to catch any of the G7? Speaking like kind of staying on the international stage.
I've been keeping tabs. I haven't been like watching the live anything live, but I've been keeping tabs on what's going on. But you go ahead. What's been going on?
Okay, well, I mean, I haven't watched it either. I had a buddy visit, so I was actually I completely checked off the news for the week, which was great. But I was reading up on it yesterday, and I mean, to me, it sounds like I've heard people say, okay, so like I think a lot of more left-leaning people were just, and myself included. I don't think it's right or left. I think a lot of like sane people were just happy to see the U.S. was like talking and making friends and talking about tangible solutions again, and that's all good, right? Like, but then again, like I've also heard like commentators from the Atlantic, the Economist, and Foreign Policy, which I think are all like great international magazines and publications, all say almost the same thing: is that it feels like this was a G7 frozen in time because Europe has back in December signed a giant investment deal with China. The UK has left, the Jesus, I'm spacing the EU. Trump has kind of made a lot of our allies question how we stand. And then at the end of the day, no matter what Biden does, the electorate could change, right? Like Biden could be gone in 4 years or 3 years
Mm,
now. And I so like as good as it looked on paper, it was nice seeing Angela Merkel and Biden smiling at each other. And it was nice seeing Boris Johnson and Joe Biden get along. And it was nice seeing them agree on China, which we'll get into a little bit just the first take here. But it's just I almost feel like it's kind of like the world has moved on in a lot of ways and we couldn't even agree on like a tangible comprehensive Chinese policy together because I don't think our allies trust us even with Biden back.
Yeah, well, I mean, I do think that there are wounds that are. I think there's political realities that Europe has realized that just that they can't rely on America for everything, right? I think um, that's something that Donald Trump succeeded in, unfortunately, is letting our allies know that, we're not going to always just have their back and pay for everything willy nilly, and you can't trust the consistency among presidents. I think that everyone knows that dealing with America, you get a different president every 4 to 8 years. That's always been the case. But I think that there's been a consistency among Democrats and Republicans that Europeans were our closest allies. Well, since World War II, that is. That like especially England and France, but obviously the rest of Europe, Western Europe, has been our allies since then. But that consistency, I think Trump broke that wheel. And so they don't really yeah, they know that Joe Biden's on their side, but they don't know where it could very easily literally go back to Trump soon. So I understand their hesitancy, but I do think that it's important to recognize the vast difference between the way our allies treat Joe Biden and Trump. I mean, even just the body language of how they interact is incredibly different. I mean, I remember all those stupid gaffes of Trump elbowing dudes out of the way to get in the front of the line and then being ostracized. Like you could see, I remember the great memes, man, of Angela Merkel and Justin Trudeau chatting it up and memeing, and then Donald Trump is right behind them alone. Obviously, those are just one-off photos, but I think in general, from the reports we got, it was true that Donald Trump felt isolated from the rest of the world leaders. That they make fun of him behind his back. Boris Johnson was caught hot mic'd making fun of Donald Trump behind his back with Justin Trudeau, I believe. And then now the way they interact with Biden, it is completely different. You could say it's all fanfare and show. Sure, that could be valid criticism, but I do think it's worth noting that how our world leaders interact with each other is important. It's almost like jobs in the real world. Like so much of it's like half of hard work, but it's half who you know, and it's half of how personable can you be. I'm sure that same thing applies to world leaders at the top stage. Yeah, there's some policy obviously there's policy realities and a lot of complex issues, but I do bet that if you can get along, if you can make Boris Johnson laugh a little bit, you could probably get a lot farther than someone who couldn't. Or you know what I mean? You can't downplay the being humane and humanity and how that can play into diplomacy. So I do think it's important to note that Biden's really good at that. He's really good at being the nice guy that smiles, that shakes your hand. And so I think he's good at making friends. And I think it was important that he did that before he went to talk with Putin at Geneva.
No, absolutely. And I don't agree with everything Biden's done so far, like any president. And I do have to say that Biden is a veteran communicator and he is a veteran, statesman. He
Yeah.
he knows these people, he knows how to work with them, and that was very nice to see. I also find it funny that you mentioned that even Boris Johnson was making fun of Trump behind his back, because that's something I've always loved a little bit. Is that I think everyone just assumed Boris Johnson was the British Trump. In
Mm.
some ways, yes, but in a lot of ways, not even close. And so I always found that just hilarious when even Boris Johnson, it was just like, hell no, I don't want to work with this guy. Um, so no, I mean, I totally agree. I totally agree with you. There's I guess there's three takeaways I have from this. Two are positive and one, well, not so much. China is the not so. I'm going to start with the negative one. Just get that out of the way. Is that I think especially U.S. media. I saw CNN was like, G7 agrees on tangible Chinese policy. I didn't see that. I,
Mm.
I I really did not see that. Just to list off the difference between France, Italy, and Britain in dealing with China over the last year. Britain made Huawei one of the biggest phone providers in the UK and
Jesus.
had one of the most welcoming investment deals with China. France didn't take any Belt and Road Initiative funding, but it didn't ban Huawei when everyone was telling them to. Italy actually signed a deal with the Belt and Road Initiative, and they got masks and ventilators back in March of 2020 when no one else had them. And I remember the Italian leader at the time, Mario Draghi, or I'm probably butchering that, so I apologize, but he basically said that we're going to remember who our friends are once this pandemic's over. And so it's really hard when you get I think okay, I think the U.S. and Japan agree on China. Actually, like Japan does not like China, but when you look at France, Britain, and Italy specifically, and Angela Merkel, she wants to maintain communication with China. Like I don't mind maintaining communication with China, but all we basically did at this G summit was say that we're going to create a Marshall Plan type of policy to combat the Belt and Road Initiative. And I didn't see a lot of specifics. It was kind of like part of Biden's Build Back Better idea, and they were going to look at private financing along with infrastructure. But the problem is like China's already doing this, and the EU and the US and Japan and Canada can't even agree on how to stand up to China. You know, I mean, I think we all agree that the Uyghur concentration camps are awful, and everyone's condemned those. But how active and visible do we want China in our economies? I don't think the EU and the US can agree on.
That's a really good point, and Joe Biden has a lot of work, and especially when you're talking about like, I mean, the fact that already considered Western countries like Italy have taken pretty big deals with China, and then not to mention, the periphery, right? Western Asia, Eastern Europe, you know, Middle East, right? That's part of the Belt and Road that still affects Europe greatly. I can see why a developing country might be like, look, okay, if my options are either, take foreign investment and infrastructure projects from China or the US, but China has less strings attached. China is probably cheaper. China has less, make sure the workers have whatever healthcare, right? Like they're going to take China's help. And so it's this, he's got a lot of work to do to incentivize. Like we have to make people want to work with America, right? Of course, people are wary of China. Europe is wary of China. But if the benefits outweigh the negatives, like if it's still a not smart move to work with America, then like of course people are going to work with China. I'm not against keeping an open dialogue with China as well. I think that's needed. But yeah, I think it's good for Biden to push this idea. I think we need to keep China in check. I think they're the sleeping giant way more than Russia is, frankly, that we need to pay attention to. But he's got a lot of work, and you're right. There's not a lot of specifics, and it does seem like Europe is on a different page than the U.S. I think Europe is. It's like the prodigal son returning. Like we're back. It's like Europe is like welcoming us back, but they know that we just went out and did blow and hookers at a strip club for 5 years. So it's like we're glad you're back and you're not doing that anymore, but we look at you differently, right? You're not the same as you were before this, and that definitely it does feel like that. So it's a good observation.
Thank you, I appreciate it. And no, I mean, like again, dialogue is good. Dialogue is always good. But to me, it seems like the EU is like slowly taking a soft line with China, where it's like, okay, they're inevitably here, so we're going to work with them. And I personally disagree with that, to be completely honest. But then again, I think the US is actually slowly taking a more realistic hard line. Shockingly, like Trump, I still give him credit for it. His rhetoric, even though it was stupid at times because he had no actual plans, it did kind of pave the way for the same thing in the Biden administration. I think the
Yeah.
U.S. is at least trying to drive that conversation. But
Yes.
but now the one positive, I don't want to leave this without any no positives. Well, there's actually two vaccines, right? About close to 1 billion vaccines sent out to the world's most needy places. So that's about 500 billion.
Yes.
Or wait, did I say a billion? So sorry. So that's 500 million.
500 is
My
half a
bad.
billion.
So
Half a
that's
billion.
500 million people. Exactly. Well, no, 1 billion doses, but
Oh, right.
500 million would actually be
Full
available, like for
vaccine.
people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's
Yeah.
two
Yeah.
doses.
Right.
For exactly. So that's cool. That to me seems like kind of a Marshall Plan s type of thing. Give needy countries something tangible. So maybe
Yeah.
they scratch your back later. I'm not saying that that's like morally always great, but it works.
I think
And
it's
there's
good
also
policy.
the no, I do too. I think it totally makes sense, and we're seeing in Latin America that the Chinese vaccines, like the Sinovacs, aren't doing as well as Pfizer and Moderna so far, at least in the studies I've seen. Like Chile's highly vaccinated, and they're seeing a huge wave still with vaccinated people. So
Mm.
we need to get these out. You know, they're a Western triumph, and I love to see that. You know, so yeah, I mean, I think that's what we have to do. We should have done it a while ago, especially because Americans aren't really down to get vaxxed. Like there's still Americans that just aren't getting vaxxed. So yeah, I mean, it totally makes sense to me.
Well,
And just the other thing is the global minimum corporate tax. Sorry, you were gonna
oh
say something. I
yes,
cut you off.
yes, the global minimum corporate tax. That's a tough one. I think that one. Um, I don't think that one will have as much steam as the media is giving it, but we'll see. I think there's just so many countries that have so many incentives to not go behind something like that that I don't see something like that happening anytime soon. But it's interesting to talk about. It's similar to like UBI. I think the conversation we're having now around these topics are something that maybe come to fruition 30, 40 years down the line, but it's interesting to start having these topics discussed. But I don't see a global corporate tax rate. I mean, already countries like Ireland have said hell no because they pretty much thrive off of being a haven. We'll see, but yeah, Biden is certainly in a unique position, and these international stuff is what most of the president does. Um, and he's starting to get into his role, and I'm glad to see the strong rhetoric around China prevail, even though, like you mentioned, Europe does not quite seem to be on the same page. I'm glad that regardless of the last two administrations, that the United States as a whole is taking China seriously.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just the one thing I'll say on the global corporate minimum tax rate is that yeah, you're right. I mean, there's definitely countries that won't do it, but the G7 came to agreement on it, at least some form of a consensus, and they're going to meet the broader group of 20 countries in Italy next month and the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. So if you have the G7 pushing it, I do think that that's at least a stepping stone. Obviously, you're right. Ireland doesn't want it. The Caymans don't want it. Bermuda doesn't want. I mean, yeah, it's going to be tough. But I like the idea of that. If we're going to raise corporate taxes domestically, then why don't we just have a flat tax? So then these companies aren't forced to go to other regions, you know, to save money. And yeah, but we shall see. Again, like you said, it's cool to see Biden is taking steam better than Kamala Harris, but he is killing it. I think so far, at least with making friends with our friends.
Yeah, he's definitely had a better week than Kamala Harris. She's had a pretty rough one. She can't seem to win with anybody. The right hates her. We all knew that because she hasn't. But I mean, the right hates her no matter what. But the right hates her because she didn't go to the border because they feel that there's a border crisis going on. Which I mean, arguably there is a massive influx of immigration and a serious lack of resources down there. So yeah, I mean, there's an issue. But they believe that because Kamala Harris hasn't gone to the border, that she doesn't care about the border crisis. And then people on the left are pissed off with Kamala Harris because she went down to Central America and verbatim said, "Do not come. If you are thinking about coming to the United States, don't make the journey." Which to a lot of progressives, they see that as a continuation of anti-immigration rhetoric from the Trump era. So she's really between a rock and a hard place. She can't win with anybody. And she's had a pretty bad week. Frankly, I kind of. This is just my personal opinion. I don't want to make anyone uncomfortable, but I kind of find her annoying, and I think it's been pretty funny to watch. But, that's just me.
We are highly in agreement on that one. You know, watching Lester Holt, like Lester Holt had an interview with her, and he literally just asked her, he's like, "So why don't you just go to the border?" And she's like, "Oh, you don't even." I forget exactly what she said, but it was snarky, and it reminded me of why I disliked her during the debates.
Oh, because
And
we
you
did go to
know,
the border.
I
She said we did go to the border, and then she's like, "Well, you haven't." She's like, "Well, I haven't, but someone else did." Like she like basically didn't answer the question correctly. It was like, "Oh my god."
yeah, I mean, honestly, man, like I don't think she's the most smooth politician,
No.
and we saw that in the debates. She wasn't that popular. And, you know, Biden picked her for a myriad of reasons, and I hope that pays off for him. But I'm not particularly impressed. But I don't want to go down a Kamala rabbit hole, at least personally, because I mean, I do think she's interesting because I don't really think either side particularly likes her if you look at the more extremes. You know, the left doesn't like her because of her criminal justice issues back when she was, you know, a district attorney in California, and the right doesn't like her because of whatever reason it is currently.
It's just funny to compare that. Like, yeah, we don't got to go that rabbit hole. It's just funny to compare that the VP had a pretty crap week, and then
Yeah.
Biden's actually doing all right.
Absolutely. Walt, like before we maybe end with some domestic stuff, just any thoughts on Putin and Biden? I think that's tomorrow. We're recording here on Tuesday, the
Yeah,
13th. Any thoughts on that one?
yeah. I mean, I think it's a victory for both already. Biden wants to show that he's tough on Russia, and he tried as best as he could to rally and ally all of his European buddies and try and get everyone on the same page before Russia. Um, how successful that is I think too early to tell, but at least he's doing that and talks to them. Um, and I think that now that he's talking with Putin, um, you know, I think he'll be able to air some stuff out. Who knows what they'll talk behind closed doors? But it shows that he'll be tough on Russia and takes Putin seriously and kind of grandstands Americans' positions. On the same page, though, Putin I think also gets a W as well because he gets to, I'm already seeing a ton of comparisons to Reagan and the Cold War and Gorbachev and all these like great historical moments in these summits between American and Russian leaders. So it puts Putin on the global stage as a superpower. He has a chance to maybe go toe to toe with Biden and prove that he's still pretty tough. Um, so I think for both of them, it's a political dub. We'll see what actually happens behind, whatever. I'm curious to see if Biden will bring up the bounties on our soldiers. He's made inflammatory comments like he thinks that Putin is a killer, which I think he is too. But the fact that a head of state has said that and now they're going to go shake hands is significant. So yeah, it should be interesting. But I think for their own like domestic politics, it's a dub for both.
Yeah, yeah, probably. You know, I mean, I think that like the calculation, at least on Biden's team, would be that there's some serious issues that we need to talk about, like, you know, still being in Crimea,
Hacks.
interfering in two domestic elections, including Biden's hacks, you know, the suspected poisoning of Alexei Navalny. And so I think the calculation is Biden's team is basically saying like, yeah, we need to like make this public and we need to like really make this a big deal. You know, but I can't, my brain just can't help but going back to when John F. Kennedy met Nikita Khrushchev and just got his ass wiped. I mean, there's a quote from Kennedy himself where he said, he just beat the hell out of me. And, you know, Kennedy was unprepared and wanted to kind of make this a big deal, and Khrushchev was, you know, decades experienced in this stuff, and he didn't have any time with Kennedy. Obviously, Kennedy was young. The report said he wasn't prepared, and this was right after the Bay of Pigs disaster, so I think he got criticized for that. Biden is obviously a statesman. He's, you know, he was a vice president. He has experience, but again,
Yeah.
so does Putin. And I do
Right.
worry that just give, like you said, it makes you the Russia look like a superpower, and it's not a superpower. So I don't know, man. It's going to be fun to see, I guess.
I mean, yeah, they cause us. They are definitely a threat, but they're not a superpower. But it'll be interesting to see how Biden deals with Putin because every president has had it differently. I think if you look at like Reagan and Clinton, they had more like rapport and they had like chemistry with Russian leaders. Whereas and if you look at like Bush invited Putin to barbecues. Trump certainly praised Putin a lot, gave him sports balls and stuff like that, whatever. Whereas Obama was a little bit more cold. I'm interested, but where none of these have worked in bringing Russia closer to the West, right? So it'd be interesting to see what approach Biden takes. I don't think he's going to be very warm. I don't think they have any chemistry whatsoever. I think these guys are pretty. I don't think they like each other at all. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of rapport they come up with, if there's any, and how they duke it out. But um, I do think it's a notable shift in the way the United States is rhetoric around Russia from the previous administration.
Very good point. Very good point. And yeah, we'll have to see. Probably put this episode out today, so at least our thoughts could be before it happens. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. And I mean, I think conversation is always good. You just don't want to be taken advantage of, and I think that's
True.
what we'll see. I don't think I kind of see Biden as that cantankerous old uncle who might fight back, but
He had a
Putin
good
is
quote though.
quite smart, as we know.
He referenced Reagan though, because they asked him about talk about Putin and trusting his word and like about the hacks and stuff, and Putin said, because Reagan had a famous quote where it was trust but verify. I think that's
Mhm.
also taken from someone else, but Reagan said it a lot and popularized it. Uh, and Biden said, verify first and then we'll trust. And so he's even taking, I think, a harder stance than even past Republican presidents, where he's like, I'm not even going to trust first. Like, we are going to have to verify everything. If we come to agreements on, because one, like for example, one is Putin had talked about extraditing Russian hackers to the U.S. as long as the U.S. is willing to extradite U.S. hackers to Russia. And Biden had mentioned that he's open to that idea. That, yeah, if we're really talking about criminals that have been harbored in the United States, we'll give them up if you give us the Russians who hacked our U.S. companies not long ago. So that's sign of real progress, and that's sign. And he's mentioned that if that was to happen, everything would be heavily verified. So I think it's interesting that again that even quoted something similar to Ronald Reagan, which was verify first then trust, a little bit of a play on trust but verify. I think it shows he's pretty serious, and there is a little bit of progress being made. So I'm actually not fully skeptical. I actually think that this could lead to something, but of course, there's a lot of work to do, and they don't have a very good chemistry.
They definitely don't. And you're right. Like, I don't see Biden just taking Putin for his word
No.
or at his word, like Trump did, back in Helsinki, for example. Now, my issue with the thing is that with the hackers, Putin's government kind of allows these hackers to work without any accountability with the Russian government. And the US does hold like illegal hackers even in our own country accountable. So like I feel like these like that's the difference is these hackers in Russia, they like aren't state actors, but Putin turns a blind eye to them or Putin's government does. And so like to me it's like there needs to be accountability in Putin's side of it as well because he
Sure.
knows what's happening and he likes it. He's just not funding it.
Sure.
But like you said, it is a step and like at least they're having a conversation. I think in a weird way, Putin probably respects Biden more than he did Trump, even though he
Oh,
said that
no
he
doubt.
sympathizes with the January 6th stuff, you know?
No doubt. I
So,
mean, dude, they would
so yeah.
they
Um,
made references to Trump as like a smarming simp on Russian state TV, dude. They don't Putin didn't respect Trump. No way. That guy kissed his ass. I don't think Putin respects anyone who kissed ass.
no, definitely not. I mean, I don't know if you've seen those photos of him riding that horse, but he looks like a guy that wants to like do some fighting. Like he does not look like someone who likes ass kickers. But but before we're out, before we're out of here, domestic U.S. like just like to start off with a joke here. Not even a joke, but just something funny this week. Jeremy Tubin, he was on CNN. He apologized for that little kerfuffle he had last year, about 8 months ago, when he was seen doing something inappropriate during a Zoom call. For people who don't know, CNN's chief legal advisor, he
That's right.
was masturbating on a Zoom call and was caught. And
God.
CNN seems to be welcoming him back. And he made an apology, and I think it's weird. Like, why is he gone for 8 months and then just comes back and apologizes? I think that's weird. But that happened this week, and Marjorie Taylor Greene apologized because I guess she went to a Holocaust
Yeah,
museum
I
and
saw
learned
that.
about the Holocaust in the process.
I saw that. Yeah.
So
I personally don't give a shit about the Jeremy Tubin thing. Like, he wasn't trying to. He just didn't know he was on camera. Yeah, it's a goofball. He messed up. It's pretty funny, but he wasn't trying to hurt anyone. So, like, I don't even give a shit about that. Um, Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's an idiot. That's hilarious that she had to go to the Holocaust Museum. It's like a punishment, like a child getting punished, because she is. She acts like a child. Yeah, that's hilarious. She sucks. Um, Some other stuff I saw that was interesting. The Keystone Pipeline was canceled. Um, that was a big one that I didn't expect. Biden mentioned the Keystone Pipeline a little bit in his campaign. Obviously, it was a big thing for a very progressive, like the progressive field, the far left. It was a huge thing. Lots of protests around the Keystone Pipeline back in the day. A lot of talk about indigenous rights, environmental issues around that pipeline, um, and even police brutality. Conversation about police brutality and the response to the protests around that pipeline. I did not expect Biden to actually go ahead and block some of these licenses that the pipeline required. It's because Biden did that then the owner of the pipeline decided it was too much of a hassle to work with the new administration to get things approved and canceled the project. So what that means is, for some, it means that they no longer, are going to work on that pipeline. For others, it means a victory. It means a victory for their protests and the movement that they've been supporting for a while for environmental justice, and things like that. I think it is fascinating to see that something that started so long ago, 5, 6 years ago now, has come to fruition in a result that a lot of people fought for. So whether you agree with the result or not, it's certainly an interesting case study in how protests can work, how active political movements can at one point bear the brunt of police brutality and tear gas, and within a few years have an administration that works very hard to cancel the project in their name. So very fascinating to see. I know a lot of my environmental buddies and indigenous community buddies are very happy to see this pipeline canceled. It does mean, it does have an effect on our energy industries, but I personally think it's a victory because I think we should get away from pipelines and the damage that they can potentially cause, and shift towards green energy.
Yes. No, I was also really surprised about that. I was talking with my dad for a while, and yeah, it's really interesting, man. I kind of really fall in the middle on that one. I really don't have a strong opinion either way. Like
That's
I
okay.
I would say we need to get away from fossil fuels. So, that's super important, and I think it's a good sign, especially because this bitumen that they're using is extremely toxic, hard to refine. It's probably not the future. So on that side of it, I like it. Also, going through indigenous lands, I've never been a fan of us treating something that's sacred to one people as not sacred to us. I haven't liked that, and I think you're right. Yeah, on the protest side, I again don't think it's going to solve the problem.
No.
I don't like that people are going to lose jobs, and I don't like that. There's a huge focus on these pipelines, but we're not focusing on resource mining in Africa around lithium batteries, for example. I think there's a broader conversation to be had about what is the next step. But you know what? Yeah, I think we should take this as a win. Definitely.
Yeah, it certainly
Something
is
else that
just
I've been
okay. Go ahead, go ahead.
okay.
Sorry, there's a delay in this Discord here, folks. So sometimes we talk over each
There,
other.
there is a delay, but no. Finish what you were gonna say real quick here. You're totally fine.
I just wanted to reiterate the statement that, regardless of the outcome, it certainly goes to show, I think there's a lot of people that are unengaged in politics that will see something like a protest happen and be like, man, you're wasting your time. Like, don't you have jobs? Like, you're wasting your time, or the system's too big, or defeatists that think yeah, man, it's all fucked. Like, what's even the point? And frankly, the pipeline thing goes to show that this is something that people fought for a while, and political change happened. I mean, there's countless examples like this all the time. I mean, civil rights movements, India's independence movements, of course. But I think people just forget that. I think people get really defeatist and negative and think that the powers that be are too strong to counteract, and this is evidence that it's not.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I don't know. Just the other thing that's kept me thinking this week is, Trump. We talked about it a little bit last week. He thinks he's coming back in August. Probably not going to happen unless something
No.
really crazy happens. But this this Arizona audit to me is again like one of those witch hunts where it's like if they find anything, it's just going to give the conspiracy minded people a little bit of fuel. And that kind of puts me into this larger issue is we are seeing pure violence in the US between people that usually used to be able to agree to disagree. There were people that used to be able to like just put their politics aside. Just yesterday, I saw there was a shooting over a mask where a guy ended up shooting the grocer because she was wearing a mask.
So
I've
dumb.
seen road rage. I've seen arguments in bars. There's been a drive-in shootings, man. I just feel like, again, like obviously domestic terrorism, domestic violence, the shootings, they all have a myriad of reasons. But I think, to me, just like the big take I've been just really having on this would be that it seems like COVID put people at home, locked us away. A lot of people went down rabbit holes, and then you mix in inequality, growing poverty, just questions about the future. And I think everyone's on edge. And I know we're all excited about this summer that's coming, but I think a lot of people almost aren't even ready to go interact with people that are maybe different from them or disagree with them. And it just seems like it could be a really fun, hot girl summer, whatever we're all talking about here. But it also could be a really violent summer, and that's what terrifies me.
Yeah, it's probably going to be both. If I know anything about American culture and how quickly we're going right back into school shootings and everything, it's going to be both. I think a lot of people are going to have a great time this summer, and a lot of people aren't. Anarcho-doomorist. I'm an environmental doomorist, to be honest. Incremental change is enough to solve the issue we started fixing in the 80s. I mean, dude, I definitely feel you, man. I definitely feel that sometimes, especially when you see how close the like doomsday clock is and how a lot of environmental scientists think that we're past the point of no return. I absolutely understand that feeling. I just do think that I think one, my point is what my point was not that the Keystone Pipeline is then meaning that we are then on the way to total victory. That's not what I mean at all. What I meant was that there are instances where political action can actually conclude in a solution that people want. Is it's even against large oil companies with pipelines and international ties, enough political pressure and enough successful media coverage can enact even a moderate candidate to some like Joe Biden in protecting what people wanted in that area. But you're right though that just because that pipeline's canceled doesn't necessarily mean we've solved climate change. I still think it's worth trying, even if we're past the point of no return. It's still worth trying to maybe save more people than complete destruction. But I can tell by your name, anarcho-doomerism. You might not agree with me, and that's okay, man. That's totally okay. I understand where you're coming from, though, 100%, and that existential dread is certainly there. But thank you for sharing your opinion. Um, I don't know what else. Anything funny or goofy we want to end with, or should we just wrap it up?
I mean, for me, the Jeffrey Tubin one, which we kind of brushed over, for me that was the kind of funny one, to be completely honest, just because I just like, I mean, it's kind of funny, and also like my pessimism towards CNN. But like, Chris Cuomo was busted for giving his brother Andrew Cuomo advice on how the media was going to treat him after these, sexual assault allegations and nursing home stuff was coming out. He was still meeting with his brother as a journalist, giving him advice, and then he was actually told he can't talk to his brother now on CNN. I think that should have happened a long time ago. And then CNN also, like, they make Jeffrey Tubin go away for 8 months, and then it comes on, and he literally just says like, it was a mistake, I'm sorry, and like, yeah, I'm glad he apologized. But I don't know, Drew. I don't usually get busted for doing that on a Zoom call, like. And it's just like, let's just take his word for it and move on. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm just stuck on that. But it's just, to me, it's just so ridiculous, and it shows that CNN, like, to me, does it. I mean, and again, Fox News is just as was much worse. But it just is kind of funny how CNN will defend some of these people. I don't know. I don't know. It's just ridiculous. I'm ranting here probably.
I get what you mean. Like, I get you. Like, if I probably did something like that, I get fired too. Like, I see what you mean that, like, it seems like he's maybe getting preferential treatment, but I also just think it's a victimless crime. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. To me, I view it as like acts like the same thing as like if you have your Zoom call on and you're changing and you accidentally leave the camera on. I mean, I don't know. He was jacking off. That is pretty crazy. But I don't know. I don't know. It's just like it's not a hill I want to die on. If he gets fired, fuck him. If he still has a job, fuck him. I don't care. I just think it's
Oh,
victimless. If it's one thing if he was like being weird and like wanting people to watch him. That's obviously a different context and of course disgusting. But I think it was just a weird accident and he's just kind of a goofball. I frankly think that the international embarrassment is enough. So I I don't want to torture him anymore.
here's here's something a little funnier then. what is his name, Rudy Gobert. He said that we're having issues with the environment, and he said the moon's changing its orbit just a
Oh
little bit.
yeah.
So he's like, why doesn't like the environmental? I don't even I forget who it was, but he basically said like, why don't we try to like tilt the moon's orbit by shooting stuff at it? And he seemed to think that's a tangible solution.
Hey man, you know what? You watch enough Star Wars, they blow up planets, they move asteroids. You know, I can see why someone would believe that. No, I'm not actually defending him. That's super dumb, and yeah, it really goes to show that while we still want to have representatives that represent everyone and the average folk, we absolutely need experts to aid our representatives in understanding these complex topics. Because yes, I mean I've seen congressmen talk about islands flipping over, worried that too many soldiers on
Hmm.
an island base will flip the island, and you're just like, are you kidding me? Like, so yeah, it's a sobering reminder that some people in our government are really stupid. But I guess I've been reminded of that a lot lately. I don't need any more, frankly.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I just have seen. I mean, I just feel like the stupid is growing. Maybe. I mean, you have the to me the like another thing on that is you had elected officials bringing in so-called experts and so-called medical officials, putting keys on them, saying they're
Oh,
magnetized by
yep.
the vaccine. It's
Yeah.
like most car keys aren't magnetized.
Did you see the
I'm
one
just
where
saying.
the lady put she said like a spoon was magnetized to her because she got the vaccine, and she like, put it on her chest, which was angled, and so like it stayed on her chest, and then she tried to put it like on her like side of her cheek, and it just fell off, and she just doubled down like it just didn't work her experiment, and then she was still like, well, that one fell, but no, I'm magnetized for real. You're just like, it's unbelievable how dumb some of these people are. Um, yeah, that was in
Oh
where
yeah.
was that? That was in like a city hall meeting in
I think it was Ohio, I
Ohio.
want to
Yeah,
say,
yeah,
because there
because
was a
yeah,
couple. Because we had, yeah, because we had we had the doctor do it, and she talked about how she's been hearing about this happening, and then we had that nurse actually do it,
I kind of
and
want to
it's like
watch it.
maybe she just didn't shower, man. Maybe her skin's sticky.
Vaccine magnet lady.
It's like I don't know. Yeah, yeah, I'm sure that'll get it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway,
the
well,
I
yeah.
mean the talk one's the doctor. She's less fun, but yeah.
Oh yeah, I want the lady that puts on like the spoons live.
Yeah,
Ah
I mean
well. Oh,
she
there
was
it
a
is.
I mean she's a true gem.
Oh
This is
well, you know
more
what?
than a
Never
mirror.
mind. All
This
these
is a
stupid
portal.
ads. Anyway, but you guys can look it up. There's a video of a lady that tries to put spoons on her body as a real argument against vaccines, and it doesn't work, and it happens live. It's pretty funny.
It is pretty funny. It makes me laugh both like just normally, but also just like it kind of makes me cry a little bit because it's like I don't even know what's next. But yeah, yeah, I don't know, man. I just that should probably wrap us up for today. As always, thank you all very much for listening. Like usual, we tried to cover a plethora of topics. Hopefully, you got some laughs, some cringes. Hopefully, you learned something.
Yeah.
And as always, we'll be back next week with more information, more episodes, more discussion. And thanks for listening.
Yeah, drop a follow. Drop a follow if you like this content, because we do stream every week. And we do upload all of our previous content if you want to see other topics on YouTube and Spotify. So look up the Tonic Accord, and you can see the plethora of topics we've covered over the last few years. Thank you, everyone, for watching.